These three movies made a crazy amount of money, all while critically exploring the negative aspects of capitalism. Squid Game is one of the most watched shows ever made, and it's all about how much it sucks to be poor, even in a rich country. From social meditations to fantastical dystopias, movies are increasingly challenging capitalist ideologies and narratives without meeting any resistance. So, in this video, we're going to get into why these critiques are finally resonating with audiences, why art is so good at communicating these hard-hitting political ideas, and why no one ever seems to understand the endings of these movies. I mean, like, lots of people don't seem to understand these endings. So, cards on the table, there are a lot of things wrong with capitalism. It is fundamentally exploitative. It's an economic system that requires infinite growth despite the very planet we live on having finite resources, which we are overconsuming as it is. And a capitalist organization of the economy leads to terrible inequality. In fact, in America today, we are living through the worst wealth inequality since monopolies were legal. Just let that sink in for a second.
Why is everyone acting weird towards me?
No, we're not. Chill, come on.
No, seriously.
But in Hollywood, at least, capitalism is implicitly believed to be fine. If anything, Hollywood has historically been decidedly pro-capitalism, insofar as such sentiments befit an ardent patriotism, whether it be the pioneering works of Clint Eastwood,
Kill confirmed.
the refined positions of Aaron Sorkin,
In this building, when the president stands, nobody sits.
He made the white people face.
or the more banal system-glorifying work offered by your standard Scorsese Kino.
I want you to deal with your problems by becoming rich.
It kinda just makes sense. I mean, hey, the whole Hollywood system is itself a monopoly. Gotta get that vertical integration, baby. But yeah, there have been a number of super pro-capitalist movies in the past. So why are we seeing this change now? Well, to understand that, I would like to focus your attention on the 1976 film, Rocky. Because for me, it's a really great encapsulation of this cultural shift that I'm talking about here. And I think it's a really good reference point for how art is able to frame ideas. Because, like, objectively, you look at what this Rocky guy is going through and you're like, Jesus, capitalism is fucking brutal. But lo and behold, that is actually not the message that Rocky is trying to send, nor is it the message that people generally read from it. To refresh your memory, Rocky is about a very poor boxer and total loner who gets a chance to fight an expedition match against the heavyweight champion of the world, Apollo Creed. And through his journey to the fight, he builds the family he never had. Though he ultimately loses, the fight propels him into fame and fortune. Thematically, Rocky is about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's trying to say, you are the only thing holding you back in life. That life isn't always fair, but you can always do more to make the most of it. To quote Peter Travers' review for Rolling Stone, what makes Rocky so moving is that we come to care about this working class hero, this underdog who's never been given a fair shake in life, and when he gets his chance, he seizes it with all his might. It's a movie about this quintessentially proletarian guy who somehow finds himself catapulted into unimaginable wealth and recognition. And there's a lot of humor in that.
Hey, Butkus! Hey, Butkus! Come here, kid! Come here!
And it's very human. It's cathartic to see a genuinely nice guy succeed in life. Because the movie starts, and Rocky is just so damn down on his luck, it's crazy. Like, he's being forced to make a living by beating people up for a local mobster, even though he feels terrible about it. And he's kicked out of his boxing gym because everyone thinks he's just a washed-up loser.
Hey, kid. You ever think about retiring? No. You think about it. Yeah.
They all tell him it's time to give up on boxing, which is like, this guy's whole thing. But yeah, ultimately, with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work, he rises above his station in life. Again, it's a nice, sentimental movie. But even wrapped up in that brief synopsis, there are just so many interesting contradictions. Right off the bat, you're like, why is this guy feeling bad about being paid to hurt people on the street, but living for the opportunity to hurt people for money in the ring? But more than that, you're like, why is this guy's dog named Butt Kiss? No, you're like, how is it supposed to be heartwarming that this one guy was able to get out of poverty, but everyone else still has to just suck it up? Rocky seizes his chance and all, but he's the only one that even gets a chance. The premise of the movie is that Creed only invites Rocky to fight him so that he can exploit Rocky's identity and body for money. You see, Creed had his real fight canceled at the last second, so he quickly throws together another amateur fight so that he can recuperate some money. And he's like, oh, I should fight a local white guy so, like, we can get a little underdog thing going, but also, like, get the racists out there fired up, because that's what he thinks will draw the biggest crowd, thereby making him the most money. That's the catalyst of the entire plot. Creed thinks Rocky is the most easily exploitable guy in the whole world. And I find it interesting because, again, Rocky is completely ashamed of the way he makes a living. When he's working as mob muscle, he explicitly feels that his body is being exploited to hurt people. And it kills him inside. But, interestingly, whenever he gets into the ring, the hyper-commercialized ring, all of those concerns go away. And the movie doesn't really bother to explore that. Like, do you somehow feel less exploited the more money you're making someone else, Rocky? But instead of exploring those interesting ideas myself, I'd like to instead contrast these themes to what I think is a pretty fundamentally similar story. Squid Game. Like Rocky, Squid Game is a rags to riches story about a proletarian protagonist who puts his body on the line to seize his chance at escaping poverty. But that description doesn't quite sit right with you if you've seen the show. This is a much more brutal narrative, I guess. In Squid Game, we follow Song Gi-hoon as he progresses through a series of absurd, deadly games in an effort to win enough money to put all of his worldly obligations, fears, and trauma to rest. But, the journey to this cash prize brings with it a whole new catalog of obligations, fears, and trauma, which tragically scar him and arguably only make his life worse. In a lot of ways, it's a much less grounded show. Like, obviously you can compare these two shots and see that. But I actually want to delve a little bit deeper here and ask you to really think just how grounded or realistic it is for a street in Philadelphia to have absolutely zero activity outside of our main character. Like, why are there no cars parked here? For me, it's because Rocky is framing its story as this one man rising above. He's not being supported by a community. He's hyper-atomized from others. But he makes it big, and he's happy, so shut the up about it, right? Rocky is trying to tell this rugged individual narrative, and to do so, it brings in some completely unrealistic elements to drive that point home. Like this fight right here. This looks more like a WWE fight than a boxing match. And that's what stories do. They try to give you some distance from reality so that you can easily engage with the story itself and its themes. So, when you're making art that is trying to really engage with harder-hitting, anti-status quo ideas that some people would consider dangerous, it's often more effective to write up a more fantastical setting so that the distance is large enough for the viewers to safely engage with those themes. Take the Avatar films, for example. Obviously, Avatar is trying to make some commentaries on Native American genocide and capitalism's destruction of natural beauty. But in James Cameron's case, it was a lot more conducive to construct this allegorical world of Pandora and the Na'vi than it was to try and write a period piece. How are you going to make a tasteful action scene this sick if it's limited by historical accuracy and cultural sensitivity? You can't. By exaggerating certain elements or taking them to their extreme conclusion, media can draw attention to underlying issues that might otherwise be overlooked or taken for granted. Put another way, visual metaphors are an effective way of communicating complex ideas. With Squid Game, you see an exaggeration of Rocky, right? You see these people killing each other, rather than just beating one another senseless. You see these disgusting, degenerate rich people paying to see murder for their own entertainment. Contrast that with the folks at home cheering them on, merely enjoying a sporting spectacle. Squid Game has to be a little bit larger than life because it's making a legitimate criticism of these systems of poverty rather than just telling you a rags to riches story. It's trying to point out that everything outside of the game is, by and large, just as arbitrary as the game itself. That the powerlessness of being literally murdered for losing a game of tug of war is not dissimilar to the powerlessness of being unable to pay for your mother's surgery. But to really nail those points home, Squid Game actually chooses to be much more grounded in realistic human behaviors than Rocky. Throughout Squid Game, there is a much greater emphasis on the desperation and debilitating stress of poverty than there ever is in Rocky. After the very first game, wherein more than half of the original contestants are killed, the survivors narrowly vote to end the games and go home. That's it. It's the second episode, and these people are already done with the eponymous Squid Game. They just saw hundreds of people murdered in front of them, and they want to get out of there. And this is where the show is really at its best, because in a series of vignettes, we see all of our characters return to their home lives a bit shaken up, but nevertheless palpably grateful to be free. That is, until the reality of their situations set in, until they are all of them reminded of the inherent brutality of their everyday lives. In the second episode, so aptly named Hell, the show puts in the work to make clear that every single day is a struggle. That poverty never gives you a moment's rest. And that no matter how much you love your friends and family, or how much potential you have, poverty simply prevents joy. So, we watch as nearly every survivor of the first match reluctantly decides to return. We understand why they choose to subject themselves to the arena. That they never really had a choice to begin with. I think that Squid Game creator Hwang Dong-hyuk's personal experience with poverty really bleeds through the script, because it reads very true. In fact, while he was writing Squid Game itself, he was so poor that he had to sell the computer he wrote it on just to afford rent. Which is genuinely tragic. Because of systemic inequality, we very nearly did not have this really excellent piece of media at all. And this man almost went through life with his talent and hard work unrecognized and unrewarded. So maybe that's why he had the wherewithal to create this show, right? Maybe he could never have made a Rocky because he knows what it's really like to live on the brink. Even though he himself was able to seize his opportunity to escape poverty, just like Rocky, he knows that that's not really what life is like. Did you know that Sylvester Stallone actually had to sell his dog while he was writing Rocky? Yeah, he was so poor that he couldn't afford dog food, so he sold his dog for $50. Just like Hwang. To me, actually, that sounds even more desperate. Wouldn't you agree, dear viewer? And yeah, like Hwang, luckily he ended up selling the script to make Rocky, so he didn't have to suffer through those terrible circumstances forever. And rest assured, the first thing he did with that money is buy Butkus back for a whopping $3,000. Yes, that is right, folks. He used his own real dog in the movie. This man named his dog Butkus in IRL.
Butkus!
But what's the damn disconnect, right? If Stallone struggled just as hard as Hwang, why are the products of those struggles so different? Well, I can't speak to the hearts of these two men, but I think Sylvester Stallone was perfectly capable of writing a harder-hitting, truer story than Rocky. But that simply wasn't the cultural zeitgeist of the time in the way that it is today. Now, I don't want to pretend that anti-capitalist themes are like a totally new phenomenon in media, nor that they are newly popular. Obviously, Fight Club, WALL-E, and The Matrix all exist, and they were all enormously successful, along with being coherent criticisms of capitalism, with the exception of Fight Club.
I felt sorry for guys packed into gyms, trying to look like how Calvin Klein or Tommy Hilfiger said they should. That what a man looks like?
Self-improvement is masturbation.
So, maybe you could say this trend isn't actually all that new, but it's definitely the case that people are more willing to engage with seriously revolutionary ideas now than they were 10 years ago. And here's my hot take. I think that is largely because of the attention economy, and more specifically, the manner in which capital C content is created within it. In fact, I go as far as to say that this cultural shift against capitalism is the inevitable result of living within this media environment. Now, I recognize that that is a pretty significant claim to make, but not to worry, I will match it with pretty significant argumentation. Consider the following as context. Virtually everyone has phones which can access like every interesting thing ever, all of the time. And those phones also allow you to easily create your own content and share anything you find interesting to pretty much everyone you know through social media. That represents an enormous shift in the media landscape. We can now consume magnitudes more media than ever before, and we do. Here are a couple of statistics for you. According to Statista, consumption of digital media in America has almost doubled in the last 10 years. And it has increased every single year since they started recording. Now let's take a look at YouTube's growth.
It's rewind time.
Back in 2009, YouTube had about 24 hours of content uploaded to it every minute, which is a lot. 1,440 times as much content as time itself. Now that number is over 500 hours every minute. Golly, that's why you guys need to like and subscribe this moment. Forget to friggin' comment while you're down there too, I mean, guy like me. But anywho, one last stat for you, lest you think this increased media consumption is just thanks to the proliferation of smartphones. The number of scripted TV shows produced in the United States has increased from 288 shows in 2012 to 599 in 2022. And that has also increased every year with the exception of 2020 because of COVID lockdowns. Point being, there's way more stuff to watch than ever before. In the past, people had TVs, and TVs had cable. The networks chose what to air and when, which forced the consumer to more or less wade through all the crap to find the stuff they liked. But now, we use streaming services and social media, which show you whatever you want, whenever you want it. To keep track of all that, those platforms have algorithms. Whenever we're watching something, we're doing so under the watchful eye of an algorithm that tries to find patterns in what we do and don't like, and synthesize that information so that it can wade through all of the crap for us. Though they do still leave a whole lot to be desired in that regard. But regardless, they're trying to personalize our media consumption in order to keep us using their platform. And that's created a happy little accident. It is now much easier for creators to find an audience for media that might not have been considered viable 10 or 15 years ago. Like, live streaming obviously did not exist, and that's huge. The video essay community, that did not exist, and that's not quite as huge. But as it pertains to this video, with algorithms driving content recommendations, there is a much greater willingness for producers to greenlight TV shows and movies that tackle difficult subjects and feature marginalized voices. For example, take my personal favorite, BoJack Horseman, an adult animation serial centered on tackling extremely serious mental health challenges while walking the tightrope of keeping that funny.
Doggy, what now?
is a difficult pitch. There were not really a lot of examples you could have compared it to when it was released. And even being charitable, it's not something you'd think would have mass appeal in the same way that a traditional sitcom would. You could maybe argue that the brass over at Adult Swim would have given it a chance, since it is still a comedy, but it never would have been the runaway success that it was had it not been a Netflix original. Or take Orange is the New Black, an absolutely groundbreaking series. How many cable TV shows in 2013 featured an almost exclusively female cast, let alone prominently feature a transgender black woman in their cast? There's just not a single TV channel at that time who would have greenlit that script with such frank discussions of gender, race, and sexuality. And it is thanks to the successes of shows like Orange is the New Black that marginalized voices are finally being heard in mainstream TV and film. That's probably the most critical change that the attention economy has ushered in. There is now a plethora of content being produced by voices from marginalized communities. And that content is being pushed just as seriously as anything else on the platforms. And now, I'm not trying to get too sentimental here. The prominence of such content is not because we've conquered racism or sexism or any of the isms. It's because streaming services, social media, and algorithms have afforded us the personalization technology necessary to get that content out to marginalized people. Which is all to say, the capitalist class has finally realized that marginalized people are still a marketable demographic. However, within that, there is another happy accident. Amplifying marginalized voices exposed a lot of unmarginalized people to their perspectives and made them realize that, hey, maybe this is all a touch unfair. Couple that with the digital activism that comes with social media, and the real, unbelievable growth of wealth inequality in the same time frame, and it's easy to see why everyone's fiddling around with the idea of replacing capitalism, or at least cis-hetero-patriarchal white supremacist capitalism. Lord knows we gave it a good go, but I think the contradictions inherent to all of those systems are becoming overwhelmingly clear. I think everyone is painfully aware that a lot of the ways our society works don't actually work. We are slapped in the face by the very visible inefficiencies of a system in which there are hundreds of thousands of homeless people, yet there are tens of millions of empty homes. Like over 30 empty houses per homeless person. 30. And while everyone is keenly aware of those problems, we are also equally aware of the shortcomings of non-capitalist societies. I, for one, don't feel comfortable supporting pretty much any contemporary political systems that are currently labeling themselves as socialist, and a lot of people don't really feel comfortable broadly supporting socialism or capitalism. And these movies play into that. For the most part, they don't deal with trying to present an alternative. The media just lays out the relatable criticisms and leaves it at that, which makes them really easy to support. That's why no one can ever understand the endings of these movies, by the way. It's because they're deliberately vague. They don't want to take a stand and tell you to actually revolt, so they kind of just fizzle out at the end. Like when you're watching Parasite, you feel in your body that there is some kind of natural progression there. So when there's not riots in the street at the end, you're like, huh? Is there something I missed? So that's my theory. Everyone suddenly loves these anti-capitalist narratives because they're an easy way to engage with the idea of disliking capitalism without really having to reconcile with the difficulties of taking political action. And the reason this phenomenon has become so visible is that the attention economy has finally given marginalized people the chance to get their stories out there in ways that were simply not possible in the past. And that, again, we are currently living through a second Gilded Age. Like, this is only comparable to that time we let dudes get rich enough to make houses that have their own fucking Wikipedia pages. There is a Wikipedia page to list the individual Wikipedia pages of the houses owned by this one dude whomst was less rich than Bezos. That's how many ridiculous fuck-off mansions he had. Just keep that in your back pocket. And if you're one of those people that is reconciling with the idea that capitalism is terrible and you're still on the fence, I urge you to take a chance. Just because there's nothing that I can currently point to for us to emulate does not mean we don't have the tools necessary to make something special. A lot of people have thought very hard about how we can improve society, and they've spent a lot of time practicing those ideas. I'm pretty comfortable saying the solutions are there. Literally just unionize your workplace. It's not as hard as you think. But please, let me know what your take is. Maybe you think this trend is simply capital exerting a further grip on the zeitgeist by commoditizing the resistance. Maybe you think this has nothing to do with the proliferation of smartphones at all. Let me know if you think I'm wrong, or if I just missed something. I'm genuinely interested in hearing people's thoughts on the subject. If you're still here, I would really appreciate it if you would take the time to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're really amazing, share this with your pals. Regardless, thank you again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.